Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. What to do when people don't understand your speech, specifically, not your message. Well, it could be partially your message, but what I'm talking about today is your speech pattern. A lot of times we can mumble or we talk so fast we don't articulate, and then people can't hear us and then they tune out. Because, as one of my mentors says, Donald Miller, if you confuse, you lose. And if people have to burn too many calories to listen to you, they will not hear you because they will tune out. Let's talk about some tips to help you with this. Number one, speak up. Literally speak louder. Now, you could speak louder and stay just as fast, potentially, like you're physically capable of that. But most of the time, when we speak louder, it takes our mind's attention and intention to be able to do that. So, the simple act of thinking about speaking louder will cause you to slow down a little bit. So, that's one. The other one is to fully articulate your words. I have worked with a number of people who speak so quickly, or they have a speech pattern where they truly do mumble, and that's what they learn. That's typically what they do. And so, as a result of that, it comes across, it comes across very clearly that you can't understand what they're saying. And sometimes it's these moments in the speech pattern where the listener is going, wait, what did they say? And I have worked with someone in the past like this too, where I love to hear what the person has to say, but then I have to lean in and go, wait, what was that? Or rewind the voicemail, for example, to listen to it again. So you don't want to make somebody have to listen harder to listen to you. So let's talk about this second tip. So the first one is volume. The second one is to fully articulate your words. And one of the ways that you can do that is to speak a little bit slower. And now I'm getting my tips a little bit mixed up here. Let's go back. We're going to talk about speaking slower. This is related to it, but with articulating, it is truly articulating every word. So think about the vowels and the consonants. And a tip for how to do this is simply to open up your mouth bigger. This happens a lot. There's certain places where I coach, or people, sometimes they have this habitually from how they grew up, where they tend to speak with their mouths closed a little bit more. And as a result of that, it's harder for their throat in the back to open up to then fully bring those words out. And when you combine that with keeping your lips kind of closed and not fully open, it can be very hard for someone to understand you. So sometimes simply opening your mouth more and focusing on articulating every word. You can see and hear how I'm doing this now. For those of you that are watching the podcast on YouTube, you can see me opening up my mouth even more and being more intentional about it. Now, I understand that it may sound strange to be talking like this. That isn't what I'm suggesting. But what I am suggesting is you practice like that. This is where recording yourself will make a huge difference, because you will hear the difference. And I always recommend to people, when you record yourself, try the extreme of what you would imagine doing. So, for example, if you are fully articulating, then exaggerate like this. That will help you, because the thing is, we are such creatures of habits, yes, of habit, that if you did that and you were afraid that you were going to suddenly always talk like that, that is probably never going to happen. With the way human nature is, you're generally going to default back to your regular habits when you're not recording yourself, when you're not thinking about it as much as you would be when you're recording. That's why you want to try these extreme measures to see how that feels with your mouth, as well as with your throat, and also with the diaphragm, that is that wonderful muscle right around your stomach that will help to support your voice, especially when you're trying to focus on speaking louder, when you truly are speaking louder. So that is articulate. So the first one is volume. The second one is articulate. And related to that is opening up your mouth fully. The next one, we talked about speaking a little bit slower. This is directly connected to the pause. This does not mean that suddenly you show up with a monotone voice. That is not what I'm talking about. This simply means to pause occasionally. It will help you to be intentional with your speech. It will also show more control because when we pause, we show more control. We come across as more controlled. And when we do that pause, it helps everybody else that's listening to us catch up to what we said, especially if our brain is trying to process what you said in perhaps a little bit of a mumbling message, if you are coming across that way. But obviously, the point is to practice the pause so that that is another tip to help with people catching up to what you've said, because sometimes it takes our brain a little bit longer. And if you speak so fast, period, whether you are good at articulating or not, it will be hard for people to keep up with you. Now, what you can do, instead of making it monotone, is you can think about shaking up your voice with a variety of tone, volume, pitch, and pace. When we can have more variety in your voice, that will make a huge difference. The last one is breathe. This is one that seems so obvious that it's hard to imagine that we would need to say it. But when we breathe intentionally, it not only helps to support the strength in our voice, it helps us to force ourselves to pause when we need to pause. Take that breath. And in the time that you would take a breath, even a little bit of an exaggerated breath, it will not feel like anything to the audience or your listener. We have to get out of our own heads. Too often, we're worried that other people are going to think we don't know what we're talking about, or we are not sure what we're going to say next. But we have to remember that a second of a pause to us feels like a lifetime, but to our audience, it feels like a nice break. Frankly, it's barely even noticed. So, one of the things that I was going to say earlier around your pace is that sometimes well, all the time you want to have variety in your voice, but sometimes we feel like we have to have this cadence that then can come across as monotone, which is why I like to say sometimes speak in sound bursts a little bit. So maybe I want to emphasize a point and go a little bit faster. But now I'm going to go a little bit slower and more intentional to drive the point home. So you can see there how I had a little emphasis and then shaked it up a little bit. Shaken. Anyway, shook it up. Yes, I'm a communication expert. Shook it up. When we can do that and create that variety that keeps people engaged, that's when people are going to stay with us. We're going to be memorable. We're going to stand out, and people will say, "Ooh, I want to keep listening to that person." But obviously, we don't want people to tune out. This is why I recommend the 4 steps that I recommended, which is to speak with volume, articulate, open up your mouth, breathe, pause, and I even said speak lower in there. It wasn't an intentional tip necessarily, but it is to speak slower sometimes. Now, these tips can also apply to any of us, frankly. It doesn't mean that necessarily it's because people don't understand your speech pattern. This really means to be intentional with the words that you are saying, fully express them with your breath through that wonderful diaphragm around your stomach. And all of these tips together will help you. But even if you pick one to work on, that will help. Pick one thing in the next week and give it a try. Now, if these tips are of interest to you, I would love to share more with you. Please feel free to follow me on Instagram. And I also have a Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus to get more tips, more videos, all the things that you need to be a confident communicator. And if you're interested in a speaker for your next event, let me know. I would love to be considered. I'm always interested in speaking on communication, and confidence so that you can be more equipped to have that unshakable confidence. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.